Hello, everybody. How is everyone doing? Welcome to the United Democratic Club's Mayoral Forum. The first people that I want to make sure that we thank are all of our volunteers who helped get everything set up today. We're 100% volunteers. As well as our moderator. We want to thank the library for hosting all of us here today. My name is Corey Smith. I'm the president of the United Democratic Club. Who is at their first ever political event tonight? Not a ton. All right, so we got a lot of regulars. Who here is a United Democratic Club member? Okay, hopefully some more hands raised in the future. Who here is an undecided voter? Good luck. So a little bit about what we did. Like I mentioned, we are a chartered Democratic club by the San Francisco Democratic Party, so we invited all the Democratic candidates here. We were able to get 5 of the 6. The last one, Michelle Bravo, did decline the invitation. A little bit about our club. We are the largest Democratic club in the city of San Francisco, founded on the principles of inclusiveness and unity. We aim to work with all shades of blue in order to advance our progressive goals, inclusive of all Democrats, and work towards the party's ideals and values. We place a strong emphasis on philanthropic engagement. We require our members, in order to be voting members, to participate in either political events or community service philanthropy. Just a couple weeks ago, we raised $6,000 for the Cooperative Restraining Order Clinic, who helps file restraining orders on behalf of women. We have a number of upcoming events. February 20th, we're doing a panel called Do You Trust the Media? February 26th, San Francisco Politics 201. We're looking at the statewide races. On March 3rd, volunteer boot camp. So if any of you want to knock on doors or make phone calls for these fine folks, we will train you on how to do so. And then on March 6th, we've got a women's committee event called Female Voices on the Campaign Trail. Last plug, United Democratic Club. We're $20 a year to join. You help us throw events like this when you become a member. Most of our events are free. That only happens when we have a big membership base to pull that off of. So with that, I will turn it over to our moderator from the San Francisco Chronicle, Mr. John Diaz.
Thank you very much, Corey. It is so inspiring as an editorial page editor to see this civic engagement here with all of you here today, and those who tried to get in and are watching online. In fact, if I had known it had drawn this kind of crowd, I would have brought some subscription cards to show it. So, but you can, I will save the product placement for later. It's my pleasure to be here with the candidates for mayor of San Francisco, and let's get right to opening statements, and we will go alphabetically. Angela Aliotto.
Hey, thank you very, very much. Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here, and I can't thank the United Democratic Club enough. I'm running for mayor of San Francisco because I believe the next mayor has to have integrity, has to have experience, has to have a passion and a love for the city of San Francisco. And certainly I have a passion and a love for the city of San Francisco, as you can see in the experience and the things that I have done when I was president of the Board of Supervisors, and then later as a civil rights attorney who also did the 10-year plan to end chronic homelessness. Let me tell you a little bit about my experience as a supervisor and as president of the Board of Supervisors. I wrote the first sanctuary law in the city and county of San Francisco. Yeah! The very first one. I'm very, very proud of that law, and nobody's going to touch it. Yeah. I also wrote the very first smoking ban in the United States, which has now gone to other countries. I wrote the first medicinal marijuana, right after my husband had passed away and they took the marijuana away from him. I wrote that law. When I'm determined to do something, I get it done. And I think that experience in my legislative record really speaks to that. I saved the San Francisco Giants to the best of my ability. At the time, they were taking them away, and we couldn't lose our team, with the help, of course, of Frank Jordan and his financial team. As a civil rights attorney, I won the largest verdict in the history of the United States of America for 23 African-American men who were mistreated horribly right in the heart of our city at Wonder Bread. So it's one of the best victories in discrimination. I have, again, I will bring passion. I will bring integrity. I will fix the issues that are driving me crazy because I love San Francisco. The homeless situation is out of control. The dirty streets are out of control. The housing situation, we need to build more housing. We need to accommodate people that work and live in the city and county.
Thank you very much, Angela. For the candidates, if you didn't notice, we have the timekeeper here. She'll hold up the yellow for 15 seconds and then red. And I will let you finish your sentences, but in fairness to candidates, we'll keep it going. London Breed.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you all for being here tonight. Thank you to the United Democratic Club for this incredible opportunity. Thank you to John Diaz for moderating this forum. And I just want to take a moment to just remind us of why we are here this evening. Tragically, we lost our mayor. And in 6 months, or 4 months, I apologize, we will decide who will lead the city, who will take over to address some of our most pressing problems. I'm running for mayor because I want to be a mayor for all San Franciscans, to address some of our most pressing issues with bold, new ideas that are going to transform San Francisco for the better. We know what those top 3 issues are. We see them every single day. Housing, homelessness, public safety. And getting into the weeds of addressing those issues is something that I've done as a member of the San Francisco Board of Supervisors. Being creative about legislation, purchasing the property at Stanion and Haight Street, the old McDonald's site, to build 100% affordable housing. That's creative leadership. Being innovative and challenging the norm and pushing for a safe injection site so that we can make sure that we do all we can to help many of our communities who we know need treatment, who we know need support, to get those needles off the street and get people into an environment where they can be safe, where we can provide treatment and support. And this June, we'll have a ballot measure on the ballot that will not only provide over $1 billion for housing for low-income residents, but also for middle-income residents. We have to start getting creative about the ideas that will make our city better. We can't just talk about it. We can't just be afraid of advocates who push back. We, as the leaders, have to push the envelope and make the changes that we need to see in the city now. And I'm prepared to be your mayor and do exactly that. Thank you.
Thank you, Linda. Next up, Jane Kim.
Good evening, and thank you all so much for being here today. My name is Jane Kim, and I've had the honor of representing this city over the last decade. First on our school board, where I served as president, and now on the Board of Supervisors, where I represent the district that we are in today. Over the last 10 years, I have demonstrated a track record of fighting for and winning bold initiatives. I'm proud of the fact that I have won more affordable and middle-income housing than any city legislator in the nation, and that I have won the highest record levels at 33% and 40% of our large major developments here in my district of affordable and middle-income housing. I'm also proud, with all of you, to have made San Francisco the only city in the nation to make community college free for all of our residents. Worked to pass some of the strongest eviction protection laws as well that have reduced low-fault evictions here in our city, something that we saw rise up until 2015. And thanks to the passage of this law, the tenants union, and many groups, we have now seen a reduction in low-fault evictions here in San Francisco. I'm also proud to have worked to give our minimum wage workers a raise to $15 an hour. And I was proud to author that in 2014. 2/3 of our minimum wage workers are women. This is absolutely a women's issue as well, and we will all rise to $15 an hour this July of 2018. And finally, I am proud to have initiated 3 major initiatives in my district. One, monitored public restrooms, which we started in the Tenderloin. It's now known as the Pit Stop. We've expanded to close to 20 throughout the city to make sure that people have a place to go to the bathroom with dignity. Also worked with Mayor Ed Lee, who gave our office $6.6 million to expand a 24-hour medical respite shelter in our district, a homeless shelter that is staffed by nurses, clinicians, and psychologists, and I look forward to the ongoing discussion today.
Thank you, Jane. Now we will hear from Mark Leno.
Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you, United Dems. Thank you, John Diaz. And thank all of you. This is democracy in action. And that's what it's all about. So appreciate your being here. My name is Mark Leno, and I'm a small business owner in San Francisco, having served on the County Board of Supervisors, the State Assembly, and the State Senate these past 18 years. And I'm running for mayor because I have a firm conviction that we need a new direction at City Hall. On June 5th, voters will have a clear choice between fundamental change and the status quo. Should I be so fortunate to be elected mayor, I intend to shake things up. Our crises of housing affordability and availability and homelessness are out of control. We need a mayor who will think big, reject cynicism, and demand results. I have authored and written and signed a fair campaign promise, signed by two of my other candidates here. And in it, we denounce, renounce, and reject all super PAC funding in this mayor's race. And if we were to all join hands and make that statement, I'm confident that we will succeed in allowing the voters of San Francisco to decide who our next mayor is without the corrupting influence of deep-pocketed special interest super PACs. So let's stand together and give the power back to the people. I'll try to share with you some of my legislative accomplishments in the hour to come. I'm going to respect the time. Thank you all very much.
And we'll hear from Amy Farrell-Weiss.
Hello, everyone. I'm Amy Farrell-Weiss. I became activated in local politics back in 2011. It was shortly after I graduated with a master's degree from the MPA program with a special design major in organizational development from SF State. And I stayed afterwards and got very little pay, but was excited to create a new program there where I taught strategic management, outcomes planning, evaluation to small nonprofit organizations. And Shaman Walton, who's actually running for District 10, his organization participated in that. So I got activated when I saw that a Chase Bank was allowed to displace 3 local storefronts by collapsing them and then also breaking the law by not allowing conditional use hearing in order to decide for the neighborhood if a bank was wanted there. And there was a neighbor of mine, Gus Fernandez, who actually took the time to teach me the zoning code. And at first, the zoning code is very onerous. But I had been in Portland, Oregon, and in the northeast part of Portland, Oregon, I saw rapid gentrification and displacement. And so when I was in the Divisadero neighborhood, I saw that happening as well, but I thought there has to be a way that instead of just resisting, that we can actually create the strategic plan and organize to support our yes, because we need a yes as well as a no. And so I started Neighbors Developing Divisadero in 2011. I also joined John Avalos's campaign and supported the public bank back at that time, and I'm glad to see that we're moving forward in that now. But I really wanted to invest energy in creating the world and the city that I wanted to see. And so guess what? I did it. And I did that work. And then in 2015, people were, quite frankly, scared of running against Ed Lee's money machine. But I stood up, and I didn't want to have despair about the future. And I said, I'm going to actually task myself as part of a democracy of coming up with these strategic plans to address the biggest issues of our city. I have a card here that shows you these 10 different things that I'm ready on June 6th to move forward with a strategic plan. And hopefully this dream team that's up here representing San Francisco, we can all work together with collaborative leadership.
Thank you, Amy. We will be getting into policy specifics real soon, but I first wanted to ask a question about leadership. As reflected, I think, in some of these opening statements, this city is deeply divided in many ways, riven by resentments that have been only aggravated by growth and prosperity that are changing the city's look, influencing its culture, and coarsening its politics. As mayor, I want to ask the candidates, how would you go about tempering those tensions and anxieties and convince San Franciscans that your election is not just a triumph of one faction, but a mandate for inclusiveness? We'll start with, we'll go down the line, we'll start this time with London Breed.
Thank you for the question. I've been elected twice as the president of the Board of Supervisors, and it had everything to do with working with my colleagues despite our differences. We have a lot of challenges in this city, and you can't get anything done on your own. It requires working with people, even when you don't agree. Safe injection sites is one of the things that is a perfect example. When that issue was first brought to my attention, I immediately said, no way, it's probably not going to happen. I don't think I would support something like that. And then I felt like as a leader, it's important to be more open-minded and to listen and to meet with people to find out exactly why so many people care deeply about this issue and wanted to see something like this happen. I lost my sister, sadly, to a drug overdose. And when I realized what these safe injection sites could do to possibly save somebody's life, my mind was changed, and so I've been a leader on that front, and I think you have to be open-minded and willing to work with different people despite your differences, and I plan to do that as mayor.
Thank you, London. Jane Kim.
I represent a district that is currently absorbing close to 80% of all of San Francisco's residential and commercial growth. And I'm really proud of the fact that I have been able to work with every developer to make sure that every project has gone through. Now, while I've been pro-growth and have supported every development proposal in my district, I'm also really proud of the fact that as we grow San Francisco, and also as we confer value on the land for developers, because that's what we do when we promote density and height, that I ask every developer to share that value back with San Francisco by building more affordable housing, more middle-income housing, by building open space and ensuring that pedestrians and cyclists are moving safely through these newly growing neighborhoods. I think it's important that as we grow, that supply is not the only answer to making San Francisco more affordable. We must intentionally build more affordable middle-income housing, and I'm proud of the fact that my district is building 50% of all of San Francisco's affordable housing. By the way, 60% of San Francisco residents qualify for affordable housing under federal guidelines. That is how expensive our city has become, and that is why it's so important that we fight for housing that we can afford.
Thank you, John. I think your question has a lot to do about style. I had the rare experience, 14 years in Sacramento, of actually working with real Republicans. And I actually could work across the aisle. Some of them were the most homophobic and racist people you know. But I could identify points that we had in common. Privacy, digital privacy, and reform of our criminal justice system. And if I could partner with a Republican, a far right-wing Republican, and we were bookends, we would win that fight. And so I'm familiar with the power of building coalitions. When we passed our first equal marriage rights bill, it was making sure that all of our coalition partners were there. The Women's Caucus and the African American Caucus and the Latino Caucus and the API Caucus. And that's how we build strength. When we passed at the Board of Supervisors our inclusionary zoning ordinance, our medical marijuana identification card program, the first of its kind in the country, and providing equal access to our health plan for transgender San Francisco city workers, they passed all almost unanimously.
As an individual and a collaborative leader, I'm guided by values of outcomes over egos and also radical honesty, which is sometimes a tightrope because you want to give credit where it's due, but you also have to critique when necessary, when unnecessary harm is being done. But I always want to work together for the greater good. And And I get in trouble for it because I will always reach out to people and work together on an issue. It might surprise you, but with the Chase Bank issue, I was working with Dean Preston and Gus Hernandez. But guess who the supervisor was that actually wrote a letter of support? I saw Scott Wiener at a Spur event and went up to him and told him what was happening. And he said, you know what? You actually should have a conditional use hearing for this. And he wrote us a letter. So I have a soft spot in my heart for Scott for doing that, and that was one of my first politically active moves. But I was also in Sacramento recently for Costa Hawkins, and there were about 500 small property owners there. I was there for repeal of Costa Hawkins because stable rent is a human need. But I had the opportunity to talk to all the small property owners, and I realized, as I was a small property owner through the San Francisco Community Land Trust, we have to work with our small property owners as well, and I was able to hear that kernel of truth, and now I'm building bridges with that community so we can keep people in their homes and also support the landlords too.
Thank you, Amy.
In 2004, when Gavin Newsom and I did the 10-year plan to end chronic homelessness, I gathered 72 people. We met at City Hall once a week. I had Jenny Friedenberg from the Coalition on Homelessness, who, I don't know if you all know her, but she's encyclopedic on every homeless problem in the world. And then we had the Hotel Council, the Restaurant Council, and everybody at that table hated each other. We sat there every week until we came to a conclusion in June of 2004 with a 10-year plan. We implemented that 10-year plan that had parts of what Jenny had to say, parts of what the hotel, the restaurant, everybody, the archdiocese, everyone sitting at that table had input. Those are people that would have never sat together before. And in 2014, the city came out with our report that we housed 11,452 permanent supportive housing. Means permanent. They don't get kicked out. It was the most successful plan the city's ever had, and then it just completely got dropped.
Thank you, Angela. Candidates are doing a terrific job. Homelessness, obviously a major issue in this city. A lot has been done over the last year. We've had consolidations of programs under one umbrella, navigation centers, tracking of individuals through the system. As mayor, what more or different would you do to address this chronic problem? And we'll start with Jane Kim this time.
Thank you, John. Number one, we got to stop the rise in evictions in San Francisco. In our last homeless count, we are seeing an increasing number of individuals on our street who said that they are homeless because of an eviction, and we need to do the work to stop unfair evictions. And we also need to continue San Francisco's work of increasing rent subsidies so that families who are at risk of being evicted can stay in place in their home. What really surprised me when I joined the Board of Supervisors is that families have become the fastest growing segment of our homeless count, not just in San Francisco, but in cities throughout the nation. Second, what I mentioned in my opening talk, a 24-hour medical respite shelter. Our single adult shelters simply cannot handle the population that's coming in. They are far older and far sicker than we realize. So more medical shelters where they're staffed by nurses, clinicians, and psychologists so that people who don't have to go to the ER have a place to go to get care. I also strongly believe that more of our shelters should be under Department of Public Health. Finally, I have approved and supported 4 navigation centers in my district, and I believe having 50% of the homeless count that we still need navigation centers throughout the city. And finally, we must continue to build more affordable housing in San Francisco so we have units where we can place people and have them be in a permanent and secure housing.
Thank you, Jane.
Supervisor Kim is correct. 70% of those living on our streets were living under a roof in San Francisco when they became homeless. So to the degree that we can keep people who are housed, we are getting to the heart of the matter. And that's why I've worked so hard at the state level, and I would here as well, to reform the Ellis Act. And specifically, I would take the speculators who are abusing the Ellis Act, not the landlords for whom it was written, to court, because they are not using it in a legal fashion, and we've got to let them know they can't get away with it any longer. I would reform our general assistance program. I don't know if you've talked to people who have tried to get their benefits, who have tried to get into housing, 4 appointments to get $60 a month to get a bed in a shelter and maybe on a path to housing. We are putting up hurdles. It's a system designed for failure. We can do better.
How many people in this room are frustrated with City Hall's lack of response to the encampment crisis in San Francisco? Me too. And after the election in 2015, I have devoted myself, I started the St. Francis Homelessness Challenge, and I really wanted to take on the encampment crisis as a manageable crisis. Let's go ahead and reframe this. It is a manageable crisis. But unfortunately, City Hall's policies over the last 2 years have been to institutionalize encampments. How have they done that? They knowingly release people from the shelters, from the navigation centers, and from hospitals back to the street without shelter. So I devised a plan. This is something that I came up with called Transitional Villages back in 2014. But I did the research and found that in Seattle, they actually have a very successful program with this. So I started to do the work with encampment residents, with DPW workers, SFPD workers, residents that were nearby that were impacted, doing the hard work of actually working together to come up with a solution. I have a solution to transition 1,000 people off of the street into community integrated supported villages, and we can actually start that now if everyone on this table wants to work together. We don't have to wait till June.
Thank you, Amy.
As I said earlier, I spent years of my life, actually, and 20 years before that, working on the homeless situation that wasn't anywhere near what it is now. The principal reason I'm in this race for mayor of San Francisco is because of the tents. The tents are absolutely unacceptable in a civilized society, especially a rich society. Shame on us that all these people are living out in the streets. When we have an answer, I'd love to stop when you clap, but this young lady's going to put the sign up saying I have to stop. So I'm going to keep going about permanent supportive housing, which means we have over $640 million going out from the city and county of San Francisco to programs that have a dead end, that have an ending, like a mental health program, ends in 6 months. What do? They put the person back out on the street. You might as well throw the money away. Unless the navigation centers, the mental health places, and of course no shelters, unless they have a place to put the homeless person into permanent supportive housing, we are wasting money. We know how to do this. We did it. We were successful, and I want to do it again. I know it'll work. It's a disgrace that we have people living on the streets of our city in a tent. A disgrace.
Thank you, Angela.
When I first became a member of the Board of Supervisors, I discovered that there were 179 vacant public housing units. We came up with $2 million, and we housed 179 formerly homeless families. And we moved quickly to make sure that we did everything it took to get those families off the streets, out of our shelters, into permanent housing. During my very short time serving as acting mayor of the city and county of San Francisco, when I first got on the job, the first thing I did was work to bring all the city departments that work specifically with many folks in our homeless population. Department of Public Health, the Homeless Outreach Team, Department of Public Works, the San Francisco Police Department developed a plan of action to begin to work in those tent encampments, reducing one particular area near 9th and Brannan, Showplace Square is what they call it, from over 208 tent encampments down to 30. And people were asking, well, where are those folks going? Into navigation centers, into SROs, into some of our shelters, and through our Homeward Bound program, we have been connecting people with their relatives. But we also know that we have a serious mental health and substance abuse crises, and we have to change what we do in this city in order to address that specifically.
Thank you.
I was the first.
Oh, that's right.
I'm happy to take another round.
Let's turn to the subject of housing in terms of creating housing now. State Senator Scott Wiener last year successfully authored legislation that would boost housing construction. Local governments that failed to approve sufficient levels of new housing were going to risk losing control of their entitlement process. Now Scott Wiener wants to take it up to the next level with Senate Bill 827, which would require local governments to allow greater density. We're talking here about mid-rise housing between 4 and 8 stories around transit hubs. Your view on... Scott's not on the ballot. Mark Leno, your view on SB 827 and how you think it might play in San Francisco.
Thank you, John. I'm very appreciative of Senator Wiener's work on housing, as I am on his support for my candidacy in this race. He, in 35, streamlined the process for affordable housing, which makes great sense. So if we've got projects 50% to 100%, we should make sure they get built, and they get built as quickly as possible. With this new bill 827, which has to do with greater density allowances and greater height limits within a half mile or a quarter mile of transit corridors, that also makes great sense because, of course, property around transit corridors becomes ever more valuable. And if it's just going to be single-family homes, that's not making the best use of a public investment in trains and transit and other improvements. But I want to make sure that there are protections from displacement and gentrification, which can happen. We see it happen, as well as making sure there's affordable housing component for that. And I know that from conversations with him, this is a work in progress.
Thank you, Mark. Amy Carol-Weiss.
We already have upwards of 40,000 projects that have been entitled in San Francisco. Did you know that? So when people say that we want to have 5,000 units built a year, it's actually not a very lofty goal because we do have so many in the pipeline at this point. It's so important for us when we're talking about new development. We have to take a look at what we've already started with and have a streamlined process for permitting and an interdepartmental project management support to get that housing built that's already in the pipeline. But when we're talking about growing denser and building up, let's do that near transit, but we need to create new financing mechanisms so that we can ensure that those projects are at least 50% affordable. Do not accept anything less than 50% affordable that's stratified from 15% AMI to 120% AMI. But you know how you do that? You do that working with pension funds, you do that working with a public bank. And I was at Spur recently and we were talking about the idea of a state tax credit. And remember that they just changed the corporate tax rate at the federal level. And so that means that California can really try to capture some of that money that we're not giving to the federal government anymore and put it into building affordable housing.
Thank you, Amy.
Senator Wiener has two proposals, and the first one I agree with 100%, which is the one-time stop permitting. The permitting situation is totally out of control, inefficient, and it really drives people crazy in San Francisco trying to build anything. And that I agree with him 100% on that. On the second bill, around the transit areas, I think it is extremely important that if you're going to be building around transit hubs, that you are building that thick and that high, you also have to look at the infrastructure. For example, on Geary Street, we need the light rail on Geary Street. If you're going to be building up 7 and 8 stories high, then you have to have the infrastructure that's going to meet it. And the infrastructure financially is there. We seem to be building it everywhere else. We seem to be overextending our contracts. But if you're going to agree totally with the new bill, which I don't think it's completely finished yet, I would absolutely insist that the infrastructure go with it. Because you know what? The transit hubs around this city, because we're a transit-first city, are all over the city. So you're talking about a lot of building up to 8 stories. So you really need to make sure we know what we're talking about.
Thank you, Angela.
During my first term on the Board of Supervisors, I introduced neighborhood commercial transit district legislation that basically changed the density of the Divisadero and the Fillmore corridors to not increase the height, but increase the density so that more units could be built. So yes, I think it's important that we definitely try and build more housing in San Francisco using this particular mechanism, but I also agree with Senator Leno that we have to make sure that there are tenant protections in place in this legislation so that we're not pushing current residents out of the communities to replace those particular housing, and in many cases rent-controlled units for new development that's not under rent control.
I completely agree with the premise of increasing density along transit corridors, and you have seen my work on that in the district that I represent, in the south of Market and Mission Bay, and even in new neighborhoods like Treasure Island, where we're working to build the infrastructure to accommodate the growth that we have entitled there. I also agree that we can do more growth and density along our major transit corridors, and Angela talked about Geary Boulevard. I think that's certainly a corridor that could do a lot more housing. That being said, with any type of growth, as I mentioned before, as we confer value to your land, we have to have some mandates on minimum levels of affordable middle-income housing that you're building for San Franciscans to live in. And second, we need to also make sure that we have anti-displacement controls, so that if there are existing tenants on those sites, that we have a one-for-one replacement of those units. And finally, Amy had talked a little bit about post-entitlement. It is not just about entitlement alone. She's correct. We have tens of thousands of units that are entitled that are not being built. And once developers go through the rigmarole of getting community and elected official support, we should be helping them in the post-entitlement process to move quickly through the permitting and approval so they can build quickly for our city.
John, I have a question for you. Just on the point of Senator Wiener's
I'm not on the ballot.
I'm just asking just to point out that he has a provision in it with regard to entitled projects that there's a use it or lose it component to it, so they have to use it within 3 years or there's consequences.
Well, let me turn to an issue of crime that a lot of people seem to be talking about here in San Francisco. How many of you have experienced a car break-in? I mean, I think I picked a relevant question here. Obviously, this wave of car break-ins is a huge concern. Last year, more than 30,000 vehicles were broken into, yet there were just 446 arrests through November 2017. As mayor, where would this issue be on your priority list, and what would you do about it? We'll start with Amy Farrow-Weiss.
So it's important to look at this comprehensively. We don't want to just pour money into the police department, because that's actually not going to solve the issue. I passed some of these out to you. The plan that I have to transition 1,000 people off of the streets into community integrated transitional villages. If we address the economic injustice, the social injustice, the racial injustice, and San Francisco take a lead in becoming a center of equity for the whole country, then what we're going to do is give people a place so that they're not acting out of desperation and they're integrated into community, and that creates more eyes on the street. How many people love Jane Jacobs here in the house? Jane Jacobs was someone who talked about planning, and it's very important when you plan to include opportunities for there to be visibility and people walking around and having that interaction and community. So what I would do is create these safe spaces. And yesterday I was over on Mission Street at night, and there were all these people with old-fashioned roller skates that were going down Valencia Street. We can really be creative in putting the arts and culture back into creating eyes on the streets and supporting mental health support as well.
Thank you, Amy.
We are broken into all the time where I live, so I insist on putting the car in the garage, and this is happening all over the city. I don't think it has anything to do, with all due respect, to the homeless population. I think it has to do with vandals. I think it has to do with not having having enough, in my opinion, police officers on bikes, for that matter, police officers on horses around Golden Gate Park and around the whole Golden Gate Park area like San Francisco used to have. I think it has to do with us having cameras and the city having cameras. And I think it has to do with us being diligent. And someone said the other day, well, you know, aren't you blaming the car owner? I said, no. If I leave my briefcase and my purse in the front seat of my car, I can't be upset that the window was broken. Though it's horrible that it happens, but I need to take some personal responsibility and not leave things in the car. So I think the penalties need to be stricter, and I think we do need more police officers, and I believe that we need cameras, and we need to let everyone know that does it, you're not going to get away with it, you need to stop doing this in this city. The other night, my daughter's car was just totally broken into. They didn't take anything. It was just for fun.
Thank you, Angela.
Just recently, last year, along with my colleagues, we passed legislation that I led the effort on to ask rental car companies to notify the folks who rent cars to make sure that they notify them not to leave their valuables in the car. And why this is important is because we noticed that the data shows that in those areas where we have a lot of tourists, those are where we have some of the highest car break-ins. And it's not to say that we're not experiencing this citywide. Of course, awareness is important, but the other thing is definitely we need more beat officers on the street. And finally, we need to be able to prosecute the people who are doing this. Scott Wiener has a bill at the Senate now because if you break a window, that's not something that prosecutors could use to actually convict someone for committing that crime. His legislation will change that and give us local protections that we need to prosecute those criminals who are breaking into our cars and ruining the quality of life in our city.
A few things. We need a centralized investigative division unit in SFPD. This is something that we used to have, but we have since disseminated them throughout the neighborhoods, thinking that that was a more proactive way of dealing with auto burglaries, but actually we were missing the bigger patterns because we no longer have a centralized investigative division. In the DA's office, we need a dedicated unit. So this low-level crime actually gets the attention that it deserves. Currently, DAs are prosecuting a number of different cases, many more deserving of much more attention. The DA's office is just simply not going to be able to pay attention to these types of crimes if we don't have a dedicated unit to them. Third, I believe that we should be paying youth ambassadors and community volunteers to patrol their neighborhoods at night. When we're seeing auto break-ins happening while people are out enjoying dinner with their family and their friends, along with increased foot patrol, we need more cameras and lights in our neighborhoods. And finally, President Breed had mentioned, the vast majority of auto burglaries actually happen 80% between 9 a.m. and 8 p.m. It happens during the daytime, not at night. We need to have an education campaign called Eliminate the Inventory. Once we eliminate the inventory, we will see a dramatic reduction in these types of crimes in San Francisco.
Thank you, John. Yes to property crime units in every police station, and yes to community policing, and yes to more foot patrols. We're learning more about the nature of this crime now. It is an international crime wave. Folks were stopped at San Francisco International Airport with suitcases, trying to get them on a plane, with laptops that were stolen out of cars in San Francisco. So this is a very sophisticated crime wave, and we need to focus on the hotspots. There was just a case the other day at Alamo Square where a plainclothes police officer caught someone in the act. It didn't end too well for the officer, and we pray for his recovery when he was rammed by a car. But we can focus on those hotspots, and currently these criminals are acting with impunity. They just know they'll get away with it. When we start focusing on the hotspots, when we start catching people, when we start prosecuting people, we will change that dynamic. There must be consequences. We can turn this around. How did it ever get this bad?
Thank you, Mark. Well, this is San Francisco, and you're all Democrats, so I'm going to stipulate that everyone on this stage supports the concept of sanctuary city. Two-part question. Do you think San Francisco law right now strikes the right balance in terms of which people either convicted or arrested for a crime are notified with ICE. In part 2, Acting ICE Director Thomas Homan has suggested that elected officials in sanctuary cities are defying federal law and ought to be arrested. Now, if you're elected mayor, are you willing to go to jail to defend sanctuary city? We'll start with you, Angela.
Well, as the author of the sanctuary law, I am willing to go to jail to protect people.
Yeah!
I absolutely am. This is the city of St. Francis, and it's a sanctuary for people who are being prosecuted in other countries, people who are being mistreated because they're gay or because they're Asian or because they're black or because of who they are. So yes, we are a sanctuary, and yes, we will take you in, as all of our great-grandparents got to come into this country. So yeah, I fight Trump on that one too. The one thing, though, that I don't agree with, when I originally wrote the sanctuary law, I did not include covering dangerous felonies, people who had committed dangerous felonies. I, quite frankly, am not very big on protecting people who have committed dangerous physical felonies, whether they were born here or whether they came from somewhere else. So David Campos came to me and said, would you mind if we amend your law to add dangerous felonies? And I said, yes. I don't think that would be proper. The sanctuary law is about giving people a life again who didn't have a life in the countries they came from. And as a consequence, we were going to take them in. But not if you come here and then do violent felonies. So that I did not accept. My sanctuary law did not have that clause.
Thank you, Angela.
Of course, I support our sanctuary laws, and when we had terrorists who tried to come and descend on San Francisco, I was one of the first persons to stand up against those folks who basically tried to come in and destroy our city and tear our city apart. I will continue to be a strong advocate for making sure that we are not only moving our sanctuary city, standing strong for our sanctuary city, but more importantly, putting the dollars into the organizations that are also protecting our immigrant population. People are scared to talk to law enforcement. People are scared to seek help. And we have to make sure that the services that exist in our communities are services that they feel comfortable with seeking. And so I'm committed to not only protecting our city now and tomorrow and always as a sanctuary city, I'm committed to making sure the dollars are placed in the organizations that will continue to work with our immigrant population in doing so.
Thank you, London. Jane Kim.
I strongly support our existing policies around Sanctuary City and the State Trust Act here in San Francisco and throughout the state of California. If we are truly worried about public safety and violence on our streets, we need stronger gun control laws. But rather than revisiting really good policies that actually help strengthen trust between local enforcement officials and all of our communities, whether they're immigrants or not, I think we need to revisit who's the president of the United States, who has been questioning and also politicizing tragic incidents that happen in our city to rile up his base. I don't think, again, we should be second-guessing good policy that has largely worked both in San Francisco and the state of California based on our president's tweets, but we must continue to stand strong with our immigrant community, who has for a long time been an engine of our local economy and has strongly supported strong community policing in San Francisco.
These ICE raids are clearly an assault by this federal government on the sanctuary and the independence of our communities, and we have to speak up loudly to stop them. As a Jewish man and as a gay man, I know what it's like to be targeted by Donald Trump and his hateful neo-Nazi and white supremacist friends. I would say all of us up here are in their sights. All of us are, and all of us in this room. So we need to band together. We are stronger in numbers, and that's why our faith community, our churches and synagogues and mosques have said they will be sanctuary places. And David Chu passed a bill that now protects workers at their places of employment from ICE raids, as well as our schools and other public institutions. We can band together. We can stand up to this madness coming out of Washington, D.C.
Thank you, Mark. Amy Farrell White.
It's so important as Americans that we finally take a good look in the mirror and see how our economic policies and our interventions in other countries that have been undemocratic have actually created the need for people to leave their countries in Central America, It's important for us to look at that, and so we understand why there are people that are coming to San Francisco for refuge. It's important for everybody here, not just the elected officials, to say, if you get a rapid response text and you find out that ICE is over at a certain location, how many people here would take some time and actually go and be a support for our neighbors? So let's think about it being all of us as a city that are going to take a stand and get in the way of people being endangered. And I know that there are people right now that meet over at SAMSM, I believe it is, for the ICE headquarters. Alex Yuan has been talking about going there and giving support. So you can actually get involved in that right now.
Thank you, I don't think I need a show of hands here to get agreement that traffic congestion in the city just keeps getting worse and worse and worse. Now, I want to ask the candidates, starting with Lennon Breed, would you advocate some kind of toll system in certain areas like they have in London?
So, I don't know if I would advocate for a toll system, but I do think that we are going to need to make some changes to what we're experiencing with a number of rideshare programs like Uber and Lyft and Chariot and shuttles. And let me just be clear, I'm not opposed to these modes of transportation. But when you think about it, before many of these modes of transportation became a part of the fabric of San Francisco, we had taxi cabs and there were a limited number of taxi medallions. And I do think that we have to implement some regulations. We have to work with the state of California to put in place some safeguards in order to address some of the challenges with traffic congestion because of what we know is happening in our city. I, for one, am a user of all modes of transportation. And you all know when you pull up the app, you see a bunch of cars circling in one particular location. But that's happening for thousands of people all over the city. We have to do something to make changes and put limits in place.
Thank you, Lennon. Jane Kim.
I think it was very hard to anticipate the immense growth that this city has experienced since 2011. We grew by another eighth of our population, almost 100,000 people in San Francisco over the last 5 years, and we are seeing that certainly on our streets. Number one, I absolutely support congestion pricing. I believe it works. We are seeing that it's working in London and in other cities throughout Europe. We should be figuring out ways to ensure that there are less cars on the road, because frankly, our city is just not built for this many cars as the rest of the We are also piloting actually the first congestion management program on Treasure Island as this neighborhood continues to build. So we are actually enacting it, and we're also looking at how we can do this, creating express lanes on the 101. We currently have a toll on the Bay Bridge, but not going south. Second, I think we need more ferries, more buses, and more protected bike lanes. It's great to talk about second R2, DTX, electrification, all of these major improvements I support, but we frankly know we need near-term improvements that are far more affordable. I believe water, buses, and protected bike lanes are the way to do that.
To save myself some time, I want to endorse what my colleagues have already said. Great ideas. I am very open to congestion pricing. Yes, London has had a success of it. Stockholm has a success of it, but it's very complex. We should study it well so we get it right. 50,000 Lyft and Ubers, 50,000 cars a day crowding our streets, over 170,000 daily trips. So this is a massive change in our traffic management plan. We need to better manage these new 100,000 residents that we have. We need better planning and decision-making at the MTA. It's not working. For example, with Van Ness nearly crippled now for maybe a couple more years, it should be prohibited to close even one, much less two, I've seen it happen, lanes on Franklin and Gough during rush hour traffic. It just should happen.
Amy Farrell Weiss.
So in the transit world, they have this term of polymodal. And so I'm polymodal in the sense that I ride my bike mostly. I also drive a truck for my work with the St. Francis Homelessness Challenge. I walk and I use public transportation. So I'm a systems thinker when I think about how we need to address these things. If I had become your mayor in 2015, there was a reason I ran. And one of them was because the administration was turning its head to what was going on with Uber and Lyft and the amount of cars that were coming in. And we do need to regulate that. We have an opportunity to actually, there's something in London right now that's being promoted called Con Cars, where the leader there is named Khan, and the idea is, what if we used a platform that was working with local residents to create something that would be an alternative to one of the corporate platforms that currently exist for TNCs. There's another thing, these red lanes, they're hard to get used to, right? So a lot of pains with the red lanes. But I was envisioning this idea of what if these red lanes, if we got more car sharing that was going on, that we could actually open the red lanes up to residents who are using car sharing programs and to more transit opportunities. So we have to be creative with how we support different types of transit that aren't just people taking individual trips.
Angela?
I agree 100% with what former Senator Mark Leno just said. I agree with Mark 100%. It's absolutely outrageous that Uber, Lyft, Chariot, all of these different companies are using our infrastructure, ruining our streets, congesting our streets, and they don't pay the city and county of San Francisco a penny. I don't know how they're getting away with it. Someone at MTA needs to also, with all due respects, get their act together with what they're doing with the streets. Everything from Van Ness to Broadway to Geary to Franklin to Gough, all the thoroughfares that are possibly there are always congested. I really think there needs to be a huge changeover at MTA, as Mark was just suggesting. And you need to have a mayor that is not going to be afraid to say, hey, Mr. MTA, see you later. Maybe you've been here a little too long. We need to find someone that loves this city, is going to take care of all of this traffic, and somebody that is going to put together some kind of tax on these large companies that don't even talk sometimes to us because they're using all of these cars. We need to get into it, we need to regulate it, and we need to make sure they pay their fair share. They're ruining our streets.
Here on this beautiful February afternoon, instead of a year from now, because of the tragic death of Merritt Lee in December. So I have a two-part question about the process after his death. What are your thoughts on the handling of that process that led to the board's appointment of Farrell as interim? And secondly, some people, including Farrell himself, have suggested that the charter should be changed in some way. Do you advocate any charter change? And we will start with Jane Kim.
So one of my top priorities was ensuring that we had a race with a caretaker mayor, and if there had been 6 votes for a more progressive elected, I certainly would have done that. But the biggest priority was ensuring that we had a smooth transition where the city of San Francisco had a full-time mayor who could serve our city over the next 4 months. I strongly believe that voters should decide who our next mayor is, and they'll be able to do that on June 5th.
Yeah.
Yes, and in revisiting our city charter, I'm certainly open to looking at how we amend how the process takes place for acting an interim mayor.
Thank you, Jane. Mark Leno.
Thank you, John. Clearly, this was a decision by the Board of Supervisors of which I was not a part, but I was on record as saying that nobody on the June 5th ballot, including myself, should be interim mayor. So I'm looking forward, not back. With regard to change to the charter, curiously, our charter allows the executive branch of government to appoint members to the legislative branch of government. They're supposed to be equal and separate branches of government, so That's like the president appointing a replacement to the House of Representatives for the Senate. Should there be another way for us to replace supervisors that doesn't include the executive branch? Because we do want to make sure that they are separate branches of government.
Thank you, Mark. Amy Farrell-Weiss.
Like many of you, I was really shocked at the outcome of that Board of Supervisors meeting. And I was there that day, and I was there prior to that, saying that why don't we do this differently? We have the opportunity to have a collaborative process, and that's what the Board of Supervisors do. They're legislators, they write contracts, they understand how to make sure that you have a fair process. And so what could have happened instead is that the group could have chosen someone who would say, any appointments that the mayor makes during this time, any commission appointments or changes, has to go through the entire board. So you have 11 people that are making that decision instead of just one. And there's also the opportunity to do that with the budgeting process, because that's really the lead role that the mayor is going to be taking during this time. So we could have thought outside of the box in regard to that. And I was thinking, if we're going to continue with Ed Lee's leadership until we have the opportunity to vote again, then it should have been someone like Naomi Kelly, or someone who's working in city administration, and maybe we should look at that in the charter. There should be a vice mayor or someone working in the city that would take up that role when the opportunity comes up.
Thank you, Amy.
Well, I think there should be a charter change. There should never be two branches of government run by one person. And the president of the Board of Supervisors, which I was, is a very powerful job, and it's a very difficult job if it's done well. And it's a full-time job, I might add. It's difficult, I would imagine, to be a candidate and be the president of the Board of Supervisors. So I do believe that the charter needs to be changed to make sure that never happens again. But that didn't happen with Dianne Feinstein, and it's because she had the votes. Within 8 days, they voted her in, and she was in. There was no issue, there was no fighting, there was no bickering. It's just it was a different Board of Supervisors where they came up with the votes to enable her to get in. But I think it's very important that the two branches of government be very distinctly apart. And I also think that in this mayor's race, it's extremely important that there be a level playing field. A level playing field. We should all have had to have started out from the same place, even though some elected officials have the advantage anyway, but that's something they were elected to by you, the people. I'm a we the people person, and so I think that was the problem that charter doesn't.
None of us expected to lose the mayor last year, and as the board president, I was responsible now for the city as acting mayor, according to the charter. I didn't try and fight to hold on to two positions. I said from the very beginning that whatever my colleagues decided, I would support that decision. I may not agree with the decision, but I support the decision. And it's time for us to focus on what voters want to hear from the candidates for mayor. Issues around homelessness, issues around housing, issues around public safety, the things that we care about the most. What happened in the past is unfortunate, but it happened. And now it's time to make sure we do everything we can, and I will, as mayor, do everything I can to not only bring San Franciscans together, including my colleagues who I still have to work with, including Supervisor Kim, who's sitting right next to me, who did not support me. I still put her on the Land Use Committee. I still made her chair of Government and Oversight Committee. So we got to be bigger than that. San Franciscans are counting on us.
Address part 2 on the charter amendment?
Yes, and I would be open to having the discussion about the changes to the charter, since there will always be a rotation of members of the Board of Supervisors and the mayor. If this is basically a potential challenge in the future, maybe we should make it clear in the charter so that there is no question.
Well, we have reached the point of closing statements. leaving a few questions on the table, but we'll get them when they come in for the editorial board meeting. So we're going to go in reverse direction alphabetically this time, and we'll start with you, Amy Farrell-Weiss. Your closing statement, please.
Thank you. It's so important with democracy to have a process where we're actually not just starting off with a horse in the race, but we're putting equity issues first. And like I said before, everybody sitting at this table is someone who is competent to be able to lead San Francisco. And I would like to take us in a direction where we were actually a mayoral team that was working on things. I believe that I have the skill set as someone who's dedicated the last 20 years of my life to supporting individual, organizational, and collective community well-being from the ground up. And so when I've been working these last 2 years on the ground with the encampment crisis, just like when I worked at the AIDS Project in Santa Cruz and through the HIV crisis point, I understood the whole system of the immune system and the body. I've learned by working with DPW workers, SFPD, Department of Homelessness, Department of Public Health, HSA. I've worked with the people working on the ground, and I've worked with the department heads to the best of my ability over the last 2 years so that we can work collaboratively to actually address these things. I wouldn't be running for mayor right now if I felt like anybody on this stage besides myself actually had the track record of addressing the issue of the encampments like a true crisis. And so that is something that is a signature issue for me. But I also put forward ideas back in 2015, and maybe you didn't hear about them because the media said that Ed Lee was running unopposed. But really, I was putting forward, I'm not an apparition of democracy, I'm real. And so I tasked myself with coming up with these strategic solutions. And some of the things that we're talking about today, modular housing, ADUs, transitional villages, public safety, public broadband, all of cannabis that's equitably accessed, all of these things are things that I put forward as ideas back in 2015. And now I'm an even stronger candidate, and I can't wait to serve as your mayor.
For my entire career, I have stood up for those without a voice. When I was in the state legislature, I moved forward single-payer universal health care reform. I was able to amend the Ellis Act to exempt SROs from it, thereby protecting tens of thousands of our most vulnerably housed from wholesale eviction. Introduced the nation's first equal marriage rights bill, and is able to raise California's minimum wage above the federal poverty line to $15 an hour with an escalator clause, so we'll never fall below the federal poverty level again, lifting millions of Californians out of poverty and giving 5.3 million Californians a raise. And I worked tirelessly on criminal justice reform so that we could remove felonies from 800,000 Californians' records and give them a misdemeanor on their records so they can move forward with access to housing, education, and employment. Now I'm fighting to make sure that the homeless living on our streets with mental health and addiction issues can get the permanent supportive housing that they need. I'm also fighting to protect the quality and character of our neighborhoods and our small businesses and our merchant districts to keep San Francisco a place where working people can afford to live. So please join me in our fair campaign promise. Let's keep those super PACs and all that deep-pocketed special interest money out of this race. On June 5th, voters will have a clear choice between fundamental change and the status quo.
Thank you, and I just want to thank everyone for being here today, and I've really enjoyed our first debate. I started my career as a community organizer, working in neighborhood, fighting for more affordable housing, longer transit lines, and protecting single-room occupancy hotels, which many of our families and seniors lived in, and then went on to work at Lawyers Committee for Civil Rights, where I fought to expand voter protection throughout the state of California. On the Board of Supervisors, I have won and negotiated record levels of affordable housing, and have also fought to make sure that we fought for middle-income housing as well. I've worked to make City College free, again, for all of our residents, regardless of age, income, or any type of pre-GPA request, because I really believe that we need to invest in our lifelong learning institutions. I also fought to make minimum wage workers' salaries rise to $15 an hour, and continue to fight for strong eviction protection laws to protect our renters and families here in San Francisco. And I'm going to continue that work. I've introduced a measure with Supervisor Norman Yee to make San Francisco's single largest investment in early childhood education and childcare at $130 million. And it's going to wipe out our wait list of 4,200 families that are waiting for childcare today, and expand subsidies to middle-income families, and pay our childcare workers more, who make on average $26,000 a year. Work to end unfair evictions in San Francisco that are pushing out many members of our immigrant community, our senior community, and often the most vulnerable, pushing them far out of San Francisco where they live and work, and also pushing them out onto the streets. We need to declare a state of emergency on homelessness so we can continue to address this crisis together. And I strongly support expanding the Pit Stop program, and also medical respite shelters like the one that we have on the South Market. And finally, I support using any additional dollars in our budget to go towards street cleaning. And I've introduced a measure this past Tuesday that would use $2.5 million of surplus funds in our general fund to increase street cleaning services in San Francisco. We can do more to make this a city that we are all proud of. Thank you very much.
Thank you. You know, I grew up in this city, and I grew up in poverty. I experienced, well, I'm not happy about that. The gun violence, the hopelessness, the despair, the challenges. I got sick and tired of everyone claiming that they were fighting to help protect me, and I decided to rise up with my community support and fight for myself and the people that I grew up with. I love this city. And part of some of the challenges that we faced required us to be more creative about changing the policies. From my perspective, that's how I make decisions, like neighborhood preference legislation, making sure that people who actually live in the neighborhoods could access to the affordable housing that gets built in their neighborhoods, like supporting and protecting our small businesses with loans and the things that they need in order to be a part of the fabric of this community. Living in that condition makes you think differently about policy. It may sound good to say that someone's going to do something, but does it work? Does it work for the people that we are trying to support and serve? It's why I continue to fight for all of my residents. It's why I won't do this job in fear of losing it. If I have to take a chance to make a decision about something, and there's a bunch of advocates who don't like the decision that I made, then tough luck. We have work to do in this city, and we got to be willing to go against the norm in order to make the changes that we want to see in San Francisco. And I, for one, will be a mayor who is open, who is honest, who is direct, who is clear, who is willing to work towards a better San Francisco with each and every one of you. My work on the Board of Supervisors has been about working together and creating policies that change the thoughts of the traditional policy-making bodies in the city. So I hope you will consider supporting me for mayor. I look forward to a continued discussion. I have a housing platform that's on my website that talks about my work, as well as my vision for what we can do to change what's happening with our housing market in the city, and there will be more to come. Vote London Breed for your mayor in San Francisco. Thank you.
By luck in the alphabet, you get the final word.
Well, thank you so much, John, and thank you all so much for coming out. I think it is so great to see so many people coming to want to see who the next mayor of San Francisco will be. I was born and raised in San Francisco. I had my 4 children in San Francisco. Actually, I believe I'm the only mother running for mayor, the only parent running for mayor.
I'm a co-parent.
Kind of a unique position. It means more to me that there are not needles in the sandbox at the parks. But recently I went to a park. I was taken over to see the park because there were so many needles in it. I was the author of the needle exchange legislation. I authored it to save lives. I've authored the HIV, the non-smoking. Just about everything I did when it came to the health laws was to save lives of San Franciscans, to give them a healthy, beautiful life. Now our city, the soul of our city is being taken away. There are tents all over our city. It's not acceptable. There are filthy streets. It's not acceptable. There need to be penalties for people that dump their garbage on the streets of San Francisco. Someone needs to arrest them. There need to be serious penalties. And let me say why. Garbage all over our streets causes diseases. And whether you're homeless or whether you're down and out for a week, you can get so many diseases from the outrageous amount of garbage on our streets. And it takes away from the soul of our great city. As a born and raised San Franciscan, you can see the soul slipping away. And the question is, why? Why is it slipping away? Why are we not doing? Where are the artists? Where are the artists on the street that bring back the life of our city? Where are the flower stands that bring back the life of our city? Why are we being smoldered by these massive internet companies that sometimes won't even talk to us? We need to bring together in coalitions and make them sit down at the same table with us. This is our city, and we're losing the soul of it, and we can't lose the soul of it just because there are a couple of billionaires in town that are able to make things a little more difficult. We need to bring them to the table, and I will absolutely do that. I've done it before. Thank you all so much.
What I found to be a very substantive and civil discussion. Please give a round of applause.